Hello, welcome to the Whispered Abyss channel. Happy viewing. Elliot Hayes paced his tiny apartment, a restless energy crackling beneath his skin. Outside, the city was drenched in a relentless downpour. Neon signs flickered across rain-slicked streets, their reflections rippling in the puddles. The storm had knocked out his Wi-Fi hours ago, cutting off the distractions that usually kept him company on nights like these. His apartment was a disarray of half-empty coffee mugs, forgotten books, and an aging rotary phone that sat on the desk in the corner. It was more decorative than functional. Elliot couldn't remember the last time it rang. Until tonight. The first ring was so unexpected that it startled him, the sound sharp and foreign in the stillness. Elliot turned toward the phone, frowning. His cell phone sat untouched on the counter, its screen dark. The rotary phone rang again. "Who the hell still uses these?" he muttered, approaching it cautiously. The heavy handset felt cool in his hand as he lifted it to his ear. "Hello?" At first there was nothing, just the faint hiss of static. Then a voice spoke, low and deliberate. "Elliot." Elliot's breath hitched. The voice was eerily familiar, too familiar. It was his own voice, but distorted, like it had been recorded on a dying tape. "Who is this?" he demanded. "You don't have time," the voice said, ignoring his question. "You need to leave. Right now." "Is this some kind of joke?" Elliot's voice rose. "Who's messing with me?" "This isn't a joke," the voice replied, its tone flattening. "Look around, Elliot. You know something's wrong." Elliot's eyes darted around the room. Everything looked the same. His unmade bed, the pile of clothes on the floor, the flickering glow of the desk lamp. And yet, an inexplicable unease clawed at his chest. "Why should I listen to you?" he asked, gripping the receiver tighter. "Because," the voice said, chilling in its calm, "if you don't, you won't survive the night." Elliot's throat tightened. The static on the line swelled, growing louder until it drowned out the voice. Then the line went dead. He slammed the receiver back onto the cradle and stepped away, his heart pounding. The rain outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling against the window. The phone rang again. Elliot froze. Elliot stared at the phone, its ringing cutting through the storm outside. The sound was sharper this time, more insistent. It shouldn't have been possible. He just slammed it down. But there it was, ringing again. He hesitated. His pulse thundered in his ears, and his chest felt tight, as if the air in the room had grown heavier. The phone rang a third time. With trembling hands, he picked up the receiver. "Whoever this is, stop messing with me." The static on the other end was louder now, crackling like fire in the background. The voice came again, the same eerie imitation of his own. "I told you to leave, Elliot. This is your last chance." "Leave for where?" he shouted. "What the hell is going on?" "You won't believe me until it's too late," the voice said, its calm tone sending chills down his spine. "But you'll smell it soon, and then you'll wish you had listened." The line went dead. Elliot's hand dropped to his side, the receiver dangling. His breaths came in shallow, panicked bursts. He told himself it was just a prank, someone spoofing his voice to mess with him. But then he caught it. A smell. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. A bitter, acrid stench, like burning plastic mixed with something metallic. His stomach churned as the odor grew stronger. He turned toward the kitchen. The darkened doorway loomed at the far end of the apartment. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as he approached. The closer he got, the worse the smell became. He flicked the light switch, but the bulb overhead sputtered and died. The kitchen was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the city outside. Elliot grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the gloom. He scanned the room, his eyes darting over the counters, the stove, the sink. Nothing was burning. And yet the smell was overpowering now, making his eyes water. He swept the beam across the floor and froze. Something was there, a black, viscous substance seeping out from beneath the refrigerator. It pulsed, almost as if alive, spreading in slow, deliberate waves. "What the hell?" Elliot whispered, stepping closer. The phone rang again. Elliot's head whipped around. This time, the sound was deafening, reverberating through the small apartment. He sprinted back to the living room, his heart pounding like a drum. Snatching up the receiver, he shouted, "What is happening to me?" The voice on the other end was calm, almost pitying. "You waited too long, Elliot. Now it's coming." "What's coming?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, the static returned, louder and more chaotic, until it sounded like a scream. And then the lights went out. Elliot stood in the pitch-black silence of his apartment, his breath caught in his throat. The flashlight's narrow beam quivered as his hand trembled, its light barely piercing the darkness. "Stay calm," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "It's just a power outage." But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The voice, the smell, the viscous black ooze. Something was wrong, impossibly wrong. The silence didn't last long. A faint noise echoed from the kitchen, a wet, dragging sound, like something slick pulling itself across the floor. Elliot's heart raced. He turned the flashlight toward the doorway, the beam trembling as he took a cautious step forward. "Who's there?" he called, his voice cracking. The sound stopped. Elliot hesitated, straining his ears. Then it started again, louder this time, moving faster. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. Something moved in the shadows just beyond the flashlight's reach. A shape, impossibly tall and hunched, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally as it slithered into view. The beam caught a glimpse of glistening black, like oil, rippling over the thing's form. Elliot stumbled back, barely stifling a scream. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "This isn't real. This isn't happening." The thing's head tilted toward him, and for a moment, the flashlight illuminated its face. Or what should have been a face. Instead, there was a featureless void, an empty black hole that seemed to swallow the light. The phone rang again. Elliot spun around, the flashlight beam swinging wildly as he bolted toward the living room. The creature let out a guttural, otherworldly sound, halfway between a growl and a scream, and the wet, dragging noise erupted into a frantic scuttle behind him. He reached the desk just as the thing entered the room. Without looking back, he snatched up the receiver and yelled into it. "What do I do?" The voice answered immediately, calm but urgent. "Don't let it touch you. Get out." Elliot dropped the phone and turned toward the front door, but the creature was faster. It moved with a horrifying, jerking speed, its elongated limbs stretching unnaturally as it blocked his path. The flashlight flickered as Elliot stumbled back, searching for anything he could use as a weapon. His hand found a heavy metal lamp on the desk, and he swung it with all his strength. The lamp collided with the creature's arm, and for a split second it recoiled, the black ooze splattering onto the floor. A shrill, ear-splitting scream filled the room, and the thing retreated into the shadows. Elliot didn't wait to see where it went. He grabbed his jacket and bolted out the door, slamming it shut behind him. The hallway was just as dark, the storm outside raging louder now. The phone's ringing followed him, echoing through the walls as if the sound itself were alive. He ran for the stairs, but as he reached the landing, a new sound stopped him cold. Another phone was ringing. This time, it was coming from the apartment below. Elliot paused on the landing, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. The sound of the phone ringing below echoed eerily, louder with each passing second. His instincts screamed at him to keep running, to get out of the building and never look back. But something held him there, frozen in place. What if the thing had moved to his neighbor's apartment? What if someone else was in danger? Gritting his teeth, Elliot forced himself to descend the stairs. His flashlight beam bounced across the peeling wallpaper and the cracked tile floors. The smell from earlier lingered, faint but unmistakable, like a ghost trailing him. He reached the second-floor landing, his heart hammering in his chest. The ringing was coming from apartment 2B, the unit directly below his own. "Miss Callahan?" he called out, his voice shaky. The old woman who lived there was reclusive, but she'd always been kind to him in passing. If she was in danger, he knocked on the door hard. "Miss Callahan, are you there?" No response. The phone kept ringing. Elliot tried the doorknob. To his surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, silent apartment. "Miss Callahan?" he called again, stepping inside. His flashlight swept the small living room. The furniture was old and worn, the air thick with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. The phone was on a side table near the couch, its rotary dial glowing faintly in the darkness. Elliot approached it cautiously, his skin crawling. As he reached for the receiver, a faint noise stopped him. A wet, gurgling sound coming from the kitchen. He turned, his flashlight trembling as he aimed it toward the doorway. "Miss Callahan?" The noise grew louder, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic thumping. Elliot swallowed hard, every instinct telling him to run, but his legs carried him forward. He stepped into the kitchen, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the shadows. There she was. Miss Callahan sat slumped at the kitchen table, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. A thick black ooze dripped from her mouth, pooling on the table and spilling onto the floor. Elliot's stomach turned. He stumbled back, his hand covering his mouth. No, no, no. The wet, gurgling sound stopped. Slowly, Miss Callahan's head turned toward him, the motion jerky and unnatural. Her lips parted, and the same distorted voice that had haunted him on the phone emerged from her mouth. "You didn't leave, Elliot. Now it's too late." The lights in the apartment flickered, and the air seemed to hum with an oppressive energy. Behind him, the phone on the side table began to ring again. Miss Callahan's body convulsed, the black ooze spreading across her skin like veins of liquid shadow. Her limbs stretched unnaturally as she rose from the chair, her blank eyes fixed on Elliot. He stumbled back, his flashlight beam shaking wildly. "Stay away." Her mouth opened wide, too wide, and a guttural, inhuman scream erupted from her throat. The sound pierced his ears, and he bolted, tripping over the threshold as he fled back into the hallway. The phone in her apartment kept ringing, its sound now joined by others. One by one, the phones in the building began to chime, their mechanical tones echoing through the walls. Elliot didn't stop running until he was back in the stairwell, his chest heaving. The ringing followed him, chasing him down the stairs like a relentless predator. When he burst out into the rain-soaked street, the cold air hit him like a slap. He stumbled onto the sidewalk, drenched and gasping for breath. But the ringing didn't stop. It was coming from his jacket pocket. Elliot fumbled in his pocket, his fingers trembling as the phone continued to ring. The sound was shrill, relentless, as though the device itself was alive. He pulled out the flip phone and stared at the glowing screen. The number displayed was the same as before, 000-000-0000. He hesitated, rain pelting his face. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to throw the phone into the nearest storm drain and run, but he couldn't. Something in the back of his mind whispered that this wasn't over. The ringing stopped. Before he could breathe a sigh of relief, the phone vibrated violently in his hand. The screen flickered, showing garbled text that rearranged itself into a single word. Run. A deep, guttural growl echoed behind him. Elliot spun around, the flashlight still clutched in his free hand. At first, there was nothing but the rain and the empty street. Then, from the shadows of the alley across the road, the creature emerged. It moved unnaturally, its limbs jerking and elongating with each step. The black ooze dripped from its form, sizzling as it hit the wet pavement. Its featureless face tilted toward him, and even without eyes, Elliot felt its gaze pierce through him. The phone buzzed again, and this time, a voice came through. Calm, firm, and unmistakably human. Run, Elliot. Don't let it catch you. Head for the light. The light? Elliot glanced around wildly. A few streetlights flickered in the distance, their glow barely cutting through the storm. He didn't have time to question the voice. The creature lunged. Elliot sprinted down the sidewalk, his shoes splashing through puddles as he ran. Behind him, the wet, slithering sound of the creature's movements grew louder. The thing wasn't just chasing him, it was gaining on him. Keep going, the voice urged through the phone. Elliot's lungs burned, his legs aching as he pushed himself harder. He reached an intersection and turned sharply, nearly slipping on the slick pavement. The streetlights ahead flickered, their pale glow lighting the path in bursts. As he ran, he noticed something strange. The lights closest to him would dim as he passed, but those further away would flare brighter, as if guiding him. "What is this?" he gasped into the phone. The voice answered, calm but urgent. "It's your only way out. Don't stop." Behind him, the creature let out a deafening screech, and for a split second, the shadows seemed to surge forward, almost engulfing him. Elliot threw himself forward, barely escaping the inky tendrils that lashed out at his heels. Up ahead, the flickering light of a diner sign came into view. Its neon glow was a beacon in the storm, casting long, distorted shadows across the street. "That's it," the voice said. "Get inside." Elliot didn't need to be told twice. He bolted across the road, nearly getting hit by a car whose headlights momentarily illuminated the creature behind him. The driver slammed on the brakes, but Elliot didn't stop to explain. He reached the diner, shoved open the door, and collapsed inside, gasping for air. The bell above the door jingled faintly, and a wave of warmth hit him. The smell of coffee and greasy food filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold terror outside. Elliot looked up to find a handful of patrons staring at him, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion. "You okay, buddy?" the waitress behind the counter asked, her voice tinged with unease. Before he could answer, the phone buzzed again. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling. The screen displayed 2 words. "Don't relax." The lights in the diner flickered. Elliot scrambled to his feet, his heart still racing as the warm fluorescent lighting of the diner wavered. The patrons looked around nervously, muttering to each other. The waitress frowned and headed toward the light switch. "Must be the storm," she said, flipping the switch back and forth. Elliot wasn't so sure. The phone buzzed again in his hand. He glanced down at the screen, his stomach knotting. "It's here." The words sent a chill through his body. He spun toward the door, but the rain-soaked street outside was empty, eerily silent except for the sound of distant thunder. "Sir, are you okay?" The waitress approached him cautiously, her notepad in hand. "Don't go near the door," Elliot blurted out, his voice shaking. She frowned, taken aback. "What are you talking about?" Before he could explain, the door jingled as it slowly creaked open. The sound sent a wave of panic through him. He backed away instinctively, his grip tightening on the phone. The patrons turned their heads toward the door, murmuring in confusion. But nothing stepped inside. Nothing visible, at least. The lights flickered again, then dimmed, casting long shadows across the room. The air grew heavy, oppressive. Elliot could feel it. Something was there, just beyond the threshold, waiting. "Close the door," he shouted. The waitress hesitated, her confusion giving way to fear as the room grew colder. One of the patrons, an older man in a trucker's cap, stood up. "What's going on here?" he demanded. The phone buzzed once more. Elliot glanced at it, his breath hitching. "Don't let it in." Without thinking, he lunged forward and slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. "What the hell is wrong with you?" the trucker snapped. Elliot ignored him, backing away from the door. His eyes darted to the windows, where the rain streaked down in thick sheets, distorting the view outside. Then he saw it. A shadow moved through the storm, its outline barely visible against the backdrop of flickering streetlights. It was pacing, circling the diner, searching for another way in. The trucker followed his gaze and squinted. "What the—" He didn't finish his sentence. The shadow surged forward, slamming against the glass with enough force to rattle the entire diner. The patrons screamed, diving for cover. Elliot stumbled back, his heart pounding as cracks spiderwebbed across the window. The waitress clung to the counter, her face pale. "What is that thing?" Elliot didn't have an answer. The phone buzzed again. "Keep moving. Back room, now." "Back room," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the pounding rain and the frantic whispers of the patrons. "What?" the waitress asked. "There's a back room," Elliot said, louder this time. "We have to go. Now." The trucker shook his head. "I'm not running from some storm. We're safer here." Another crash against the window silenced him. The glass splintered further, and the oppressive cold intensified, as if the thing outside was draining the very warmth from the air. Elliot didn't wait for further debate. He grabbed the waitress's arm and pulled her toward the door marked "Employees Only." "Come on." The others hesitated, torn between their skepticism and the undeniable dread creeping into the diner. Finally, the trucker relented. "Fine, but this better not be some prank." The group rushed into the back room, a narrow space cluttered with shelves and supplies. Elliot slammed the door shut behind them and locked it, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. "What now?" the waitress asked, her voice trembling. Elliot glanced at the phone, desperate for answers. The screen was blank. The pounding on the front window stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Then the lights in the back room went out. The darkness in the back room was suffocating, broken only by the faint light from Elliot's phone which flickered and buzzed. He held it out in front of him, trying to steady his hands. The silence in the room was unbearable. The others were all huddled together, staring wide-eyed at him, as if waiting for him to provide some sort of explanation. Elliot's throat was dry, and his voice was hoarse when he spoke. "It's coming. I don't know how much longer we have." The waitress, still gripping her apron, stepped forward. "What do you mean? What is that thing?" He didn't know how to answer. It wasn't just a creature. It was something far worse, something that had been stalking him, torturing him with every call. The message was clear now. It had been after him all along. The trucker, his face still pale but now with an edge of anger, muttered, "So we just wait here until it decides to show up, then?" Elliot turned to face him, his eyes blazing. "It's not about waiting. It's about surviving. We have to do something." But before they could respond, a sound, soft but unmistakable, echoed from the other side of the door. It was the scraping of something against metal, low and insistent. Elliot's heart leaped into his throat. He knew what it was. The thing had found a way in. The phone buzzed again, and a message appeared on the screen. "Run." Elliot didn't hesitate. "Now!" he shouted, pushing the waitress toward the back door. The trucker and the others scrambled to follow, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Panicking, Elliot rushed to the window, but the glass was too thick to break with his bare hands. His eyes darted around the room, searching for anything, any way to escape. Then the scraping noise grew louder. It was closer now, unmistakable, as though it was right outside. Without thinking, Elliot grabbed the phone again, dialing the number he had been avoiding. 000-000-0000. The phone rang twice, and then it picked up. "Elliot, you need to listen to me," the voice on the other end said, its tone cold and distant. He barely had time to process the words before the door burst open. The thing was inside. It was all black, its form shifting, constantly changing, never still. It was a nightmare given shape, a mass of writhing limbs and a dark, pulsating core. Elliot could feel its presence, even as his eyes struggled to focus on it. "Elliot," the voice from the phone repeated, louder now. "You have one chance." Elliot turned toward the phone, and in the chaos, the words on the screen rearranged themselves. "Stop it." A flash of understanding struck him. There was no escape, no running. There was only one way out. Without thinking, he stepped forward, heart pounding, and reached into the blackness. He felt cold, wet tendrils wrapping around his wrist, pulling him in. He could hear the others screaming behind him, but the phone in his hand crackled again. "End it now." Elliot gripped the phone tightly, its screen glowing brightly, the light cutting through the darkness. He closed his eyes, focused on the words that now filled the screen. The phone buzzed one last time. "You're free." Everything went dark.